Hello and welcome to 24/7 Football, and it's a little bit of a special video. We've been joined by Jonathan Greenwood from Newcastle Fan TV because Newcastle are on the verge of being taken over, which means no more Mike Ashley. Jonathan, absolute pleasure to have you on. When I say those words, no more Mike Ashley, you must be over the moon.
Yeah, firstly, thanks for having me on. Secondly, I think, Mike Ashley, his tenure has been, in other words, terrible at Newcastle United. And I think, obviously, the one thing I would say is that, yes, people are excited about the person or the company or the team around of people that want to take over the football club. But I think the biggest joy that Newcastle fans get is the fact that Mike Ashley is leaving the football club, because now we feel, hopefully, if it all goes through, a sense of positivity, a sense of can we be ambitious, and where can this football club go? Because everybody says it's got great potential. It's a sleeping giant. Well, has it got great potential? What can we do with it if we have that little bit of potential? And the one person that was kind of holding it back was Mike Ashley.
How would you, if you can, how would you summarise Mike Ashley's tenure? Because from the outside looking in, it's been terrible. He seems to have drained the life out of your club.
I don't think he's had the right people around him, but that's no excuse for some of the decisions that he's made over the last 13 years, roughly. You know, when you bring back Kevin Keegan, it's always going to be difficult because you can't replicate what happened in the 90s. But the way that was handled through appointing Dennis Wise and doing stuff behind his back in terms of transfers didn't go down very well. And obviously that was the start of when the fans wanted Mike Ashley to go. Changing the name from St. James's Park to the Sports Direct Arena doesn't help. Chris Hughton, a man who stabilised the football club and got us up from the Championship into the Premier League and was doing a very, very good job in the Premier League. Wins against Sunderland, 5-1 at St. James's, a win at the Emirates. And then he was sacked after a defeat at West Brom. Alan Pardew's appointment wasn't really well received at the time, and it was never really 100% liked. People can argue whether he did a good job. I thought he did an okay job under the circumstances, but his appointment was criticised. And then John Carver, Steve McLaren, not keeping hold of Rafa Benitez. I can name so many different reasons why Newcastle fans are sick and tired and they've had enough with Mike Ashley, with him at the football club. But it's the future that you've got to look at if this goes through, because if this deal can go through, you have to look at it financially. It's a fantastic deal for the football club.
Absolutely, and you must be really excited about it. We'll get on to the future in just a moment, but in terms of, you mentioned some of the managers there, Rafa Benitez, probably say he did a great job at Newcastle in terms of the circumstances. Was that really, would you think that was the worst aspect of Mike Ashley's tenure in terms of sacking him and bringing in Steve Bruce?
Well, I think it was the final straw. Obviously, Rafa's contract ran out at the end of last season. They just couldn't agree on a way forward together. Rafa Benitez is very ambitious and he wants Newcastle to be a top 8 club at the time. He thought he could, if he was given the tools or was given a little bit more money to spend in the transfer window. Because we were getting out, we were competitive. When you look at other teams around us at that time, like Brighton and Hove Albion and Huddersfield Town, no disrespect to them, but we're massive. Compared to them clubs, we're much bigger on a bigger scale, and we couldn't really compete with them financially, which was frightening, really, because if you're not above Huddersfield and Brighton at the end of the season, you're probably going to be relegated. And Rafa did an exceptional job, especially in the first season, his first full season in the Premier League, to get that team into 10th, because the most amount of money we spent on a player was £12 million on Jacob Murphy, and Jacob Murphy at the minute is nowhere near Newcastle's starting 11 or even on the bench. He's on loan at Sheffield Wednesday at the minute, and I don't think he's pulling up any trees there. So Rafa Benitez was the hope, and that was one big massive flag at St James's Park under war flags. It's obviously a company who try to get these massive spectacles inside the ground, and they've stopped doing that because they have had enough of the owner. And it's if you look at attendances this season, the attendances have dropped because of the fact that Rafa Benitez left the football club. There was numerous empty seats, especially in the first half of the season. But Newcastle fans had enough, and they knew that and they decided with their feet, really, because there was sometimes attendance under 40,000, and that for a club like Newcastle, who everyone knows Newcastle for a big stadium, big attendances, sell out most weeks. Most weeks, it wasn't happening anymore.
In terms of, you just mentioned then with Rafa Benitez not being backed, the oddest thing from the outside looking in again was, why did he then choose to back Steve Bruce and spend a bit of money then when he could have done that with Rafa Benitez, who, I don't know, in my opinion, is a better manager and more capable manager than Steve Bruce?
I think you're quite right. Look, I don't think Steve Bruce has much of a say in the transfer dealings of Newcastle United. I think Rafa Benitez did, and that's the difference. Steve Bruce has basically had, right, we're going to bring you Joe Linton in. It doesn't matter how much we pay for him, but he's going to be a player. Can you make him better? Alan St. Maximin, another player that came in, that Steve Bruce has kind of just given. He didn't really have a lot of say in any of the players that came. I think the only person that he probably had a little bit of say in was Andy Carroll, and said, look, what do you think? Can you keep him fit? And he's probably said, well, he's another option. He's a fantastic option off the bench. I would like to have him if possible. Look, Newcastle have a particular way under Mike Ashley how to deal with things. They want to bring players in at a certain age and sell them on with any value, which majority clubs will probably understand. The problem with what Newcastle were doing, they were spending the money on the wrong sort of players. And when you spend £40 million on Joe Linton, you're hoping that if he gets a 20-25 goal season, you can sell him for 60, 70 million. However, he scored 1 goal in the Premier League this season and a couple in the FA Cup against League One opposition. So it's not exactly the return you want. Why Rafa Benitez was never given the opportunity to properly spend a lot of money is beyond me, because even with the players that he did bring in, the likes of Miguel Almiron, who's now coming to form a little bit, Martin Dubravka, one of the best goalkeepers in the Premier League. That's probably slightly biased from me, but I think he's one of the best.
Oh no, he's a goalkeeper, yeah.
Yeah, and he's improved. He's improved players the likes of Jamal Lascelles, who's been several times been linked with an England call-up. So there are certain players that you can get. He has improved, but look, for whatever reason, they just couldn't agree on why they couldn't agree on a future together is beyond me, because Rafa Benitez is the best manager we've had since the late Sir Bobby Robson, in my opinion.
There are a few there are a few people on social media. We know social media is a bit toxic anyway, but a lot of people on social media were saying that Newcastle fans don't have it that bad. They're in the Premier League. They've spent quite a lot of money in the summer. But from your point of view, should Newcastle be bigger than just staying in the Premier League?
I think what people forget to realise is before Mike Ashley came in, Newcastle, I think, spent 8 or 9 of the last 10 seasons in Europe. So that was either the Champions League or what was called the UEFA Cup, now the Europa League. So Newcastle fans were used to finishing top half with the odd flirtation in the Champions League. And, Sir Bobby Robson did a fantastic job when he was there. Graham Souness, who took over, got us to an FA Cup semi-final, a UEFA Cup quarter-final. We were in the last stages of big European competitions, and Newcastle fans may be wrongly or rightly not expecting to get into the Champions League, but expected to challenge for those sort of places. And when we ever got to a stage of can we push on, it was kind of, now we need to stop here. I'm happy just staying up in the division. And Newcastle Newcastle fans rather, or Newcastle players, or Newcastle as a football club, bar the top men at the football club, they want more than just staying in the Premier League. If you're a fan of the Championship, League One, League Two, and you're going, oh, Newcastle, they should be really happy. They're in the Premier League. They're in the richest league in the world. They're bringing players in for £40 million. Completely understand that. But unless you're really in there and you can see what's going on week by week, I think it's hard to have an opinion on it, because you look at Newcastle now and it's a shadow of the former club it used to be just 15 years ago. It's completely different. When you speak to people that are older than me, and they talk about their times at Newcastle, and you think, wow, they had it so much better than us. Like, they had back-to-back FA Cup finals. Yes, Newcastle haven't won a lot of trophies, but we're still the 9th most successful club in England. We should be expecting a little bit more than just staying in the division. That's just a personal opinion for me, but look, a lot of people have a lot of opinions on Newcastle United, and it makes news. It does make news.
So we'll start talking about Mike Ashley now. Let's get on to the hope, which is PCP Capital Partners. Just before we talk about whether Steve Bruce will stay, what you're expecting, is it nice as a Newcastle fan to just see someone with maybe a bit of ambition coming into the football club?
Well, that's the word I've repeated on this interview: is ambition, ambitious. Amanda Staveley's been after Newcastle for a long, long time. She just couldn't be able to afford. She couldn't afford the football club. Let's be brutally honest. She didn't have enough money by herself. If it was just down to her, this takeover would not be happening. She can't afford Newcastle United, but she has the backing of the Rubin brothers and the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund as well. So it's a different ball game now. They have the money. Late last night, there were local journalists saying that Mike Ashley was willing to release a statement that this deal was done. It's the buyers that don't want it to be released at the minute, but it is the ambition. They have plans of wanting to improve, in particular, the training ground. The training ground is a disgrace in terms of Premier League standards. It's nowhere near the likes of your bigger clubs. You have to have something in place to compete if you want to be challenging for certain positions in the table. Leicester have spent a lot of money on a new training ground, which I don't know if they'll be able to use next season or the season after, but they've got that in place for years to come. And if they finish in the Champions League, which is expected, they'll look on to continue with that. You've seen Spurs with a fantastic complex, Manchester City. Newcastle don't even have it as good as some Championship clubs. And that's being realistic. They don't. They've got people that are sitting, paddling pools to do warm downs. It's not good enough. We need better facilities than that. But yeah, the training ground is one of the aspects to become ambitious, but obviously on the pitch is what really matters for any football fan, you'd like to think.
You mentioned, we'll talk. Actually, no, we'll go to that. You mentioned one club, which was Manchester City. Are they the blueprint of what you think the success could look like? Because we've seen many clubs like Aston Villa who've really thrown money at it this season, and it's not worked out. In a lot of debt, and on the flip side, when Sheikh Mansour came in with the City Football Group, took over Manchester City, really invested into East Manchester, like you say, the academy system, really built into the whole ethos of the club rather than just putting money into the team, which he did that as well. And do you think that's the route that you would want Newcastle to maybe not follow, but just to look at and admire?
I think you definitely have to look at it and admire it from a distance. But when Manchester City were taken over, financial fair play was that if it wasn't invented, it was at its infancy, wasn't it? And Newcastle now have to follow rules. So they're not going to be from Newcastle to Manchester City overnight. What they would probably like to see is maybe a step-by-step guide, year in, year out, of how we can improve it gradually. The problem is, my only issue is that if these owners do come in, how quickly do they want success without getting bored? And that could be an issue in itself. I think patience is key. You've got to look at the likes of Wolves and Leicester, I think, before you look at the likes of Manchester City. Wolves have been taken over and they, arguably could be competing for a top 4 place if we get back to playing Premier League football. Leicester are in the top 4. If you said to me five years ago, or maybe 6 years ago, before Leicester won the league, that Wolves and Leicester will be either in Champions League places or competing in Champions League places, I'd go, I don't think so. I think Wolves were in League One not a million years ago. So, look, in terms of what Newcastle can do and what they can follow, yes, they can look at Manchester City, but I'll be looking more off the pitch in terms of Manchester City. In terms of bringing players in, I think these owners will already have players in mind. I don't think Steve Bruce will have the chance to pick whatever he wants, because I think they've got the man in place, or they've got a couple of men that they want to look at.
So you think Steve Bruce won't? Yeah. So you think Steve Bruce won't be the man?
From what you read, and then you can only speculate, but from what you read, if he gets more than whenever the end of the season will be, because obviously we don't know with everything that's going on in the world at the minute. But if we do come back to playing football, I think Steve Bruce will be given the 9 games we've got left in the Premier League. I think the only thing that will be on Steve Bruce's side is that if he can keep this club in the Premier League, which you would expect, and we only need to probably win 1, maybe 2 games of the last 9, It's the FA Cup. We're in the quarterfinals. We've got Manchester City, but it's at home. It's at St James's. If this takeover was to happen, you'd like to think that can we make it really hostile for them? Of course, we wouldn't be favourites going to that game, but if we could get to Wembley and potentially have a semi-final at Wembley, who knows from then on? But look, even a quarter-final against Manchester City is going to be extremely difficult. But Steve Bruce will struggle, I think, to keep his job because you saw with Sheikh Mansour when Manchester City were taken over.
Exactly.
I think Mark Hughes only got about 18 months, roughly. I could be a little bit wrong in that. Wolves, I think, got rid of the manager before Nuno came in. You know, Leicester have got it before the even now when they got rid of Ranieri, they've got a bit of previous of sacking managers if they don't perform well. So I think they'll want success now. And if you're asking me, do you think Steve Bruce can give Newcastle trophies? I'm going to say no because I don't think he can.
No, it's a perfectly valid point and one that I'd probably share as well. Just tell me a little bit about the opportunity at Newcastle. Just before, what players you could sign a little bit, it's like that. But the opportunity at Newcastle, because it's such a football mad city, and you've got one central team, which is really unheard of further down anywhere else in England, really. And there's a big opportunity there, isn't there, for a club to really build with such a loyal fan base, getting 50,000 every week, and you can see why it's an attractive offer.
I think it's a fantastic opportunity for somebody to take this club over. You're right, it is. We are in our own bubble. There's nobody close to us, really. Sunderland are 12 miles down the road, but they're stuck in League One.
2 divisions down as well, yeah.
Yeah, 2 divisions down, and they constantly get out of League One at the minute, so they're not going to be challenging us anytime soon. You're right, there is an opportunity there. I think another reason for that is because all the other clubs that were probably available were either too expensive or they've already just been taken over. You've mentioned the likes of Aston Villa, Everton, Leeds United, who are looking for investors, but I don't think their owner wants to give too much away in terms of Leeds United. You know, the Manchester club City aren't going to be taken over anytime soon. Man United are asking for far too much money. I think they were saying they wanted £4 billion for Manchester United, which is 10, 11 Newcastles if you were to look at the reports in the paper. But the opportunity is there to create something. And if you can get it right at Newcastle, we've got players that haven't won trophies but are kept there as legends. If you were to get it right at Newcastle, you would be treated like a king. You really would. Honestly, you have no idea. When you go into the Northeast and you speak to any random man, woman or child in Newcastle or in the Northeast in general, they are football mad. You don't get many people that aren't into Newcastle or Sunderland or whoever you support because it is their life. Newcastle, Sunderland isn't the most desirable places in terms of, obviously, you look at the disposable incomes in the Northeast. If you look at even Manchester or Birmingham or London, we can't compete with that. You talked about Manchester City making East Manchester more desirable and maybe more opportunities, maybe more job opportunities. That would be fantastic if that was the case for Newcastle because, you look at this, there is so many people out of work in the Northeast, but little by little, I think that's got to be the phrase. I think you've got to do it one stage at a time. And if we can, in 5 years' time, if I do another interview with you and it's gone all well and Newcastle have improved and, Mike Ashley is a distant memory, then that can only be good news for Newcastle. But look, Manchester City have spent a bucket load of money and have never got to the Champions League final. They've won Premier Leagues and fantastic.
Thanks for reminding me of that one.
I didn't even realise you're a City fan, but
yeah.
No, but it's true, isn't it? And
definitely.
That's the big thing for Guardiola. He wants to be a Champions League winner at Manchester City. I think it's nearly 10 years since he last won the Champions League. That's for a manager like Guardiola. When you look at the last couple of years between him and Klopp, it's hard to imagine that he hasn't won a Champions League, but at Manchester City. But again, they've won every other trophy by the look of it. FA Cup, League Cup. I'd kill for a League Cup at the minute. I'd love to see Newcastle win the League Cup or the FA Cup in the next 5 years. If that's all that happened at Newcastle under these owners, I'd happily take that because I've seen my club. At least because I've seen my club win a trophy. And there are fans of other clubs who might never ever see their team win the FA Cup. And look, it's a fantastic opportunity, but got to be a bit patient, I think.
Absolutely. Listen, going back to 2008, as a young City fan, probably in the exact same position, we hadn't won a trophy in 39 years.
Yeah.
So what I can say is, if it's done the right way, you're in for an absolute treat just to see your team winning and challenging again. It's a great feeling, and we would have won the Champions League if it wasn't for the coronavirus this year. So just in terms of the new potential owners, the investment from the Middle East, um, there's obviously newspapers need things to write about, and there's a lot of talk now about human rights record in the Middle East. Should the owners or investors be allowed to take charge at Newcastle? What do you concern yourself with those type of allegations, or do you think fans should just support the football club, and if they can't control who owns the football club at the end of the day?
Yeah, you're right to a degree. Look, they are allegations. I can only stress that they are allegations. But if there was issues in regarding that, I think obviously it's more of a government inquiry rather than the Premier League or a random bloke from Newcastle talking about it. We don't know. So it'd only be obviously the government that could really step in and say, look, no, this is not happening. But His Royal Highness, who's part of the deal to take over Newcastle, has been in the same company, I think, as either the Prime Minister or the Queen. I think might have been both, to be honest. I think there's definitely some video with her shaking hands with Theresa May, who was the Prime Minister at the time. Look, from what you hear, you don't think there's going to be any issues, and you do think this deal is going to be done very, very soon. However, look, again, it should be, if any of those allegations are true, obviously you don't want to hear that. But from a selfish point of view, I'm just a football fan. I'm an invested football fan who wants to see their club do well. And if the government say otherwise, then I'm not gonna be too bothered if they take over, because in my personal opinion, you'd hope they're to do a good job. They talk about Saudi Arabia. They've got, commercially now, they're becoming bigger and bigger. They want to be involved in sports. You've seen them have an Anthony Joshua fight against Andy Ruiz.
Yeah, it was huge.
The wrestling, I'm not a wrestling fan now, but I used to be, and obviously the WWE have been in Saudi Arabia. The money's there. I think the only thing that they were really missing was football. And right, what do we want to do? Do we want to go in the Premier League and compete there, or do we want to go to another country and make it our own? Go maybe compete with, maybe if they went for an Italian team, can they compete with the Milans and Juventus? The argument's there, and they've probably gone, well, who's this Amanda Staveley? Amanda Staveley's very well known across a lot of billionaires in terms of brokering deals. She broke your deal. She was part of the team that broke the Manchester City deal. So she knows what she's doing in terms of getting big deals done. And apart from the ordinary man or woman, £300 million for a Premier League football club at the minute isn't a lot of money. Yes, this coronavirus has had a lot to do with the price, because I think Mike Ashley wanted around about £350 million. But you hear a lot of people that aren't Newcastle fans, that are more business people, and they go, well, £300 million for a Premier League football club, when you look at the amount of just the broadcasting revenues just in the UK, and not even thinking about international broadcasting rights, it's cheap. It's just, if you can keep Newcastle in the division but then become a bit more ambitious through time, who knows what could happen. But hopefully there's not bad news, and it's just good and positive news, because that's what you want, especially in the current times that we're facing at the minute.
Absolutely. And finally, just I know watching football seems a long way off, but how good is it going to be to go to a packed St James's Park once this deal has come through, and that ambition and feel good factors back at Newcastle?
I can't find the right word to describe it, to be honest with you, George. I really can't, because if Newcastle do get over and Newcastle have a home match that fans can come to and watch, the atmosphere will be absolutely incredible. The city will be absolutely buzzing. It will be. Honestly, it'll be nothing I've ever seen before. There's a thing called #cans. I don't know if you've seen it on Twitter, but no. if Newcastle get taken over, everybody's going to obviously get their cans of beers ready at the ready, and just drink until the night's over.
That's brilliant. That is brilliant.
It literally, it'll be like nothing else. Obviously, I don't know what it was like when Manchester City were taken over in that first game. After that,
it was good.
But I think it's good, but it'll be different, because I don't think you had the hate towards the last owner towards what Newcastle
No.
had with the owner that they currently have.
No, we didn't. We had Taxi Sinawatra, and he had his problems, and he was his assets were frozen. It was scary, but I don't think it was anything like what Newcastle went through. So I can imagine the feel good factor is going to be there. And I think that is the perfect place to end it on how good it is going to feel. Jonathan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on with us. Newcastle Fan TV, all their links will be in the description below. With this takeover that's happening, go and check them out because there's a lot of Newcastle related content, which is it fuels your coronavirus isolation and helps as well. So, Jonathan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you to everyone who's watched. Subscribe to this channel, like the video. Check out our website 247football.com, and we'll see you next time.